The house smelled like barbecue and cut grass. Someone had left the screen door open again, and flies buzzed lazily in the hallway, ignored in the shuffle of party prep. Folding chairs were set out in uneven rows. A cooler sat packed with soda, beer, and ice-melted water. Somewhere, a Bluetooth speaker was playing Willie Nelson a little too loud. Inside the house, Jackson Hawkins, 16, watched his mother string up a vinyl etch "Happy Birthday" banner that kept falling off one end of the wall. His father, Trevor, was in the yard fiddling with the grill, poking ribs he hadn't seasoned himself. Grandpa Ray had been banished to the porch, told to stay out of the kitchen. "And your grandpa's turning 74, Jackson's mother, Karen, said, "and she'd think we're prepping a royal banquet." "He kinda acts like a king," Jackson replied. Karen shot him a look. "Be nice, he's mellowed. He had..." "Sort of." Ray Hawkins, retired police sergeant and full-time pain in Trevor's ass, had lived with them for the last 6 years, ever since his heart gave out during a winter storm, and he refused to move into assisted living. Karen had insisted. Trevor had agreed, but Jackson remembered the cold distance that settled into his father's face for months afterward. Ray was a presence in the house, solid, sharp-eyed, and full of discipline. Even at 74, he woke before everyone else, did his goddamn stretches, drank 2 raw eggs with his coffee, and sat in his recliner like a sentry guarding a family that didn't always want to be guarded. And yet Jackson liked him, loved him actually. Ray had never treated him like a kid. He'd taught him how to fix a jammed garbage disposal, how to shoot a .22 out in the woods, how to spot a lie by watching someone's hands instead of their face. Trevor, on the other hand, wasn't so fond of his father-in-law. They didn't fight, not exactly, but they clashed, over dinner, over the thermostat, over the right way to install a garbage bag. It was the kind of tension that lived in the corners of a house, like mold. Still, today was supposed to be peaceful. Until Jackson noticed Trevor checking his phone for the 5th time in 15 minutes. "You expecting someone?" Jackson asked. Trevor flinched slightly, then forced a smile. Just waiting on the cake. And you look nervous." "Am always nervous around your grandfather. Man gives me ulcers." That was true. But there was something else. Something wired into his shoulders, like his body was bracing for impact long before it arrived. Jackson didn't press, but he watched. Upstairs, Grandpa Ray sat on the edge of his bed, polishing the silver badge he kept in a box lined with a faded American flag. His hands were steady, but his eyes were lost somewhere else. Somewhere years back. On the nightstand was a small revolver, antique, legally owned, registered. Jackson had asked about it once when he was younger. Ray told him it was mostly just for show, but the way he said it didn't feel casual. That morning, Ray had actually smiled when Jackson brought him breakfast. "Oh, you got taller," Ray said, poking his fork through the eggs. "And saw you yesterday. Still counts." Jackson had asked if he was excited about the party. Ray just shrugged. I don't need a party," he said, "but I'll take the whiskey." Trevor had laughed when he overheard, a little too loudly. "Careful, old man, you'll shoot off the roof again." Ray didn't laugh back. That was their rhythm. One jab, one block, always circling. Jackson had grown up watching their dynamic with morbid fascination. Trevor was the goof, a big smile, half-finished projects, half-serious threats to move out if that hard-ass didn't ease up. Ray was rigid, blunt, maybe even bitter. But when he looked at Jackson, there was something different there, something open. And Jackson always wondered, why didn't his dad ever get that same look? At exactly 6:12 p.m., just as the sun began to dip below the trees and the ribs were getting sauced for the second time, the sound of tires crunching gravel froze everyone. 3 black SUVs, no sirens, just movement. Fast, coordinated movement. Police officers, real officers, in tactical vests, moved up the front walk, guns drawn. One barked an order through a megaphone. "Raymond Hawkins, step away from the residence. Hands in the air." The birthday banner slipped off the nail and dropped behind Karen. Ray, seated in a folding chair with a beer in his hand, blinked once, then slowly, almost lazily, stood. Jackson stood rooted. Trevor didn't move. "What the hell is going on?" Karen shouted. Ray raised both hands. "And you boys better have the right house." "Pundu, sir," the lead officer said. "You're under arrest for possession of an unregistered firearm and for the discharge of that weapon in a residential zone." "What?" Ray snapped. "But that gun's legal." "Been sitting in a drawer for 10 years. Neighbors began to gather on lawns. Phones came out. A kid across the street was already filming. Then came the final cut. Jackson saw it first, the cop glancing over at Trevor. "And your son-in-law filed the report, sir," he said. "Said you fired the gun last night, and that the weapon wasn't registered." Ray turned his head, slowly, painfully, to look at Trevor, and Trevor just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching, like it was inevitable, like it had all gone to plan. The moment Grandpa Ray twisted free, the world stopped blinking. It wasn't a full-blown fight. It wasn't rage. It was instinct. His training, like muscle memory, baked into the bone. He elbowed one officer back just hard enough to make him grunt, then twisted to face the second with a stance that wasn't aggressive, just ready. Controlled. Unsaid. Ray growled, "That gun is mine, and I've got the papers." The officers didn't listen. Their ears were plugged with protocol. Their hands were full of plastic cuffs. From the lawn, Karen screamed again. "Pray, please, stop!" Jackson stood frozen behind the porch rail, breath shallow. His chest tightened like it couldn't process what it was seeing, like his ribs weren't sure which way the truth bent. But then it happened. One of the officers, a younger guy, red-faced and tense, rushed in from the side and tackled Ray to the grass. Not a clean takedown, not respectful. Hard, violent. Too much. Hey, stop!" Jackson shouted. He bolted forward, but Trevor caught him by the arm. "Don't interfere," Trevor said, voice flat. Not angry, not scared. Just cold. Jackson pulled away and stared at him. "Then you called them?" Trevor's jaw worked like he was chewing a word he couldn't spit. Ray was face down now, grass stains on his sleeves, a cuff zip-tied around one wrist, then the other. He didn't fight anymore. He didn't say a word. Not until they hauled him upright, arms restrained, and dragged him across the yard in front of the folding chairs and tipped over soda cooler. Then he turned his head, just enough to look over his shoulder, and said loud enough for the whole street to hear, "Told you I fired that gun?" The officer jerked his chin toward the porch. At Trevor, Ray's eyes locked on his son-in-law, hard, direct. Trevor didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't move. Jackson's brain split like glass under pressure. Every memory he had of their arguments, over chores, over politics, over who was the man of the house, replayed in rapid fire. It suddenly all looked different. More loaded. More rehearsed. "And she framed him," Jackson whispered. Trevor looked at him sideways. "She was unstable. He had an unregistered weapon. That's illegal. And no, it's not. He had paperwork. And paperwork goes missing." Jackson stepped back. Trevor wasn't yelling. He wasn't even sweating. Just standing there, watching them push Ray into the back of the SUV like it was nothing more than taking out the trash. Ray didn't struggle, but his eyes stayed locked on Trevor until the door slammed shut. The street slowly came back to life. Curious neighbors ducked behind mailboxes. A few whispered to each other. Phones had filmed all of it. Karen sat on the bottom step of the porch, one hand on her chest. Jackson stood alone in the yard watching the police cars pull away. "I don't get it," he said. He didn't shoot anything. Trevor exhaled, finally, like someone who'd held his breath for hours. "Timmy, he was a threat. He always has been." Not to me," Jackson said. Trevor didn't answer. Just walked back into the house, let the screen door slam behind him. The police station smelled like bleach and coffee and sweat. Ray had been through this building 100 times in his career. He knew its bones, knew the layout, the bulletin boards, the stupid motivational signs taped above the water cooler. But tonight, he was walking through it as a suspect, a criminal. And none of the officers were treating him like a peer. They avoided his eyes, treated him like a bomb they'd been ordered to handle carefully and disarm before it went off. They'd taken his belt, his shoes, his wallet. They'd handed him a pair of thin orange slippers and locked him in a holding cell with peeling gray walls and a bench that smelled like piss and Lysol. He sat and said nothing, because if he spoke, he might say something he couldn't take back. His jaw clenched. Then the door opened. A detective, one he didn't recognize, young, fresh shave, nervous swagger, stepped inside with a folder in hand. "Mr. Hawkins," the detective said, trying to sound casual, "and got a few statements. Neighbor heard shots, found a revolver with no serial, and a witness who says you were cleaning it out on your porch last night." Ray laughed once. A humorless breath. "Oh, I said that's not illegal. I said you discharged a weapon near a residence." "Oh, no, I didn't." "Well," the detective shrugged. "Oh, and someone says you did." Ray looked up. "Let me guess. Trevor." The detective didn't confirm, but his silence said enough. I've got documentation, Ray snapped. Licensing, registration, all filed. You check those numbers, you'll see. They were missing from the drawer, the detective said, flipping open the folder. And bullshit. The detective raised an eyebrow. Aren't you getting hostile with me, Sergeant? Ray leaned forward, slow. You want hostile? He said. Keep accusing a decorated officer of being a goddamn felon on his own birthday, without checking a single fact. The detective swallowed, then stood up. Oh, we'll run the prints, don't worry. If you're clean, you'll walk. He walked out. Ray was left with silence, 4 concrete walls, and the creeping suspicion that this wasn't a mistake. It was personal, and calculated, and someone close, had gone through a hell of a lot of effort to make it look real. Ray stared at the peeling corner of the ceiling tile, like it might blink back at him. The longer he sat in the holding cell, the more his instincts kicked in. Not panic, not paranoia, just old-school cop logic. He started noticing details, inconsistencies. There were too many things that didn't line up. The gun, his revolver, had been taken from his drawer. That meant someone went through his room. The police claimed it had no visible serial number, but he knew that wasn't true. He'd etched it himself back in the day, double-checked it last time he renewed registration. So either the cops were lying, or someone had scratched it off. That was federal crime-level territory, not something your average deputy would risk unless they were told or paid to look the other way. But the real kicker? The neighbors. The police said they had a report from multiple residents that gunshots were heard the night before, which was funny, because Ray hadn't fired a gun in years. He had hearing like a hawk. If shots had gone off in the neighborhood, he would have heard them, and yet nobody on the block seemed especially panicked earlier. No sirens, no door knocks, no mention of gunfire until today. That meant one of two things. The neighbor was lying. Someone faked the whole thing. And Trevor had stood on the porch like a man watching a fire he'd lit himself. He didn't flinch when they cuffed Ray, didn't speak up when Karen cried, didn't stop Jackson from watching. He just let it happen. Cold, like he needed Ray gone. And that begged the question, why now? Why today? Why on his birthday? Meanwhile, back at the house, Jackson paced the upstairs hallway, phone in hand, staring at the search history he'd pulled up on the shared computer. He'd gone into Trevor's account. The browser was full of red flags: how to report illegal gun ownership anonymously, and unregistered gun discharge a felony, statute of limitations for weapons violations in Georgia, and most telling of all, best prank arrests for veterans. That one made him stop cold. Prank? Jackson whispered aloud. He scrolled deeper. There were tabs open for event planning, a group chat titled Untold Dogs, names he didn't recognize. One of them, Malone, had a little police badge icon next to it. Jackson's heartbeat thumped once, slow and heavy. He ran downstairs. Karen was still cleaning up the party wreckage in a daze. The balloons hung half-deflated in the kitchen. The ribs had been left out too long. She was wrapping them in foil, as if normal things could still be done. Mom, Jackson said. She looked at him, eyes glassy. What if Dad didn't betray him? He asked. Karen froze. What? What if it's some kind of setup? But like, not a real one? Think you think this is a joke? She snapped, slamming the foil on the counter. No, not a joke, but something. He showed her the tabs. The search history, the chat log. Karen stared at the phone, reading silently, then said, What the hell is he doing? Back in the station, Ray heard footsteps echo down the hallway. Someone was coming. He stood up, spine stiff, jaw clenched. When the door opened, it wasn't the detective from earlier. It was an officer he recognized. Brian Malone, former precinct buddy, retired 5 years ago. Same slow gait, same buzz cut. Ray blinked. Malone? Brian grinned. Well, I'll be damned. Still got both kidneys, old man. What the hell are you doing here? Malone stepped aside, and behind him were 3 more men. Clint, Russ, Darnell, Ray's old squad. Half of them grayer, half of them fatter, but unmistakably his guys. Ray stared. Malone laughed. Happy birthday, you ornery son of a bitch. Ray didn't move, didn't blink. This isn't real, he muttered. Clint stepped in, holding a 12-pack of Budweiser. Oh, it's real, all right. And you scared the crap out of that rookie when you threw him on the lawn. No, I mean the arrest. One's fake. One's fake, was fake, Darnell said. Well, mostly. The cuffs were real. But the charges don't exist, Malone said. Ray dropped back onto the bench, stared at them, then rubbed his face hard, slow. Jesus Christ, Trevor planned this. Malone grinned. "On us you'd suspect something eventually, said you'd fight it, said it had to feel real or it wouldn't work. And you almost gave me a heart attack. Check your pulse, old man, you're fine." The moment Malone pulled him out of the holding cell, Ray felt the shift. The tension that had wrapped around his chest like a coil started to ease, but his legs still moved stiffly. The adrenaline hadn't burned off. His pulse still pounded in his ears. "Where are we going?" Ray asked as they turned the corner. Malone smirked. "Somewhere you belong." They passed the intake desks, the mugshot wall, the corridor lined with photos of fallen officers. But instead of turning toward the interview rooms, Malone led him through a back hallway Ray hadn't walked in over a decade. He recognized the door before they reached it, the old tactical operations room, long since decommissioned. The door swung open, and everything changed. Surprise. The shout wasn't loud. It wasn't a teenage kind of surprise full of balloons and sugar. It was gruff, awkward, and full of old lungs and worn-out backs. There were at least a dozen men and women in the room, most in plain clothes, some in faded department jackets. A folding table had been laid out with pizzas, chips, half-melted cake, and a jug of sweet tea. A vinyl banner stretched across the back wall, taped crooked above a corkboard. 74 years young minus still scaring the hell out of us. Ray froze in the doorway. Someone clapped him on the back. "And you look like you just saw your own autopsy report." It was Russ, gray-bearded, wearing suspenders and a fishing hat. Darnell stepped forward and handed him a beer. "Relax. You're not under arrest anymore, Sergeant." Ray turned slowly. Trevor was standing against the far wall, hands in his pockets. Karen was next to him. Jackson stood at the corner of the room, arms crossed, watching. Ray's eyes settled on Trevor and didn't move. "And you did this," Ray said. Trevor nodded once. "Yeah. You set me up." Trevor shrugged. "And I had help. Sid put cuffs on me. Chad to make it believable. Shin made you made your wife cry. Since she was in on it too." Ray blinked. Looked at Karen. She gave him a sheepish smile and mouthed, "Sorry." "And the kid?" Ray asked. Trevor hesitated. "And that part wasn't supposed to go that far." Ray's eyes narrowed. "And he thought I betrayed you," Trevor said. "And maybe that's what made me go through with it. Because I wanted him to see what it looked like when two men finally stopped swinging." There was a pause, long and heavy. "You wanted to scare the hell out of me?" Ray said. Trevor stepped forward. "No," he said. "I wanted you to feel seen, respected. I've spent 20 years rolling my eyes at you, arguing with you, dodging your approval. And you know what? You were right about a lot of things. I wasn't ready back then. But I am now." Ray stared. "And so you humiliated me," he said. Trevor nodded. "And say a little. Send, you had me in a cell. And Sid was clean. And I could have knocked that rookie's teeth out." "Yeah," Trevor said. "But you didn't." Ray let out a short breath, laughed once, just a grunt, and looked around the room. Every face was familiar. Every line in their faces was earned. These were the people he'd served with, fought beside, buried others with. One by one, they stepped forward, clapped his shoulder, handed him beer, laughed, told stories about the old days, about the busted meth house Ray, raided in '97, the night he got bitten by a suspect's dog and still drove the guy to the station. Even Chief Mendez, long retired, stepped forward and said, "Quantridge still got the meanest eyes on the force." Ray chuckled. "Y'all are getting soft." "Well, maybe," Malone said, lifting his beer. But today's about you, and how we ain't letting you go out like some old forgotten relic." Later, when most of the food was gone and the stories had looped back to ones already told, Ray stepped outside for air. The hallway was quiet. The fluorescents flickered faintly. Jackson followed. "Hey, Grandpa." Ray turned. "And you mad?" Jackson shook his head. "I thought I'd lost you." Ray nodded slowly. "And didn't. Just got handed a lesson." Jackson grinned. "So you're not mad at Dad?" "Oh, I'm mad," Ray said. But not for the reason you think. I'm mad I didn't think of it first." They both laughed. Then Jackson asked quietly, "Did it mean something to see them again?" Ray looked back toward the party room, and it meant everything. The next morning broke slow and gray, the kind of morning where nobody turned on the TV, where toast burned slightly and nobody mentioned it, where you could hear the wind through the trees and the floorboards creaking as if the house itself were stretching after what it had survived. Jackson sat at the kitchen table, still in his hoodie from the night before. His eyes were puffy, not from crying, but from thinking too hard. He hadn't spoken much since they'd left the station. Across from him, Karen was sipping cold coffee and peeling the label off a bottle of orange juice. It wasn't tense anymore, just cautious, like no one wanted to speak too soon. The front door opened. Ray stepped inside, still wearing his rumpled button-down shirt from the day before, sleeves rolled, face unshaved. He held a single grocery bag. "Anyone out of eggs?" he asked. Karen blinked. "You went shopping?" Ray shrugged. Didn't want to wait around. He placed the bag on the counter and started pulling out eggs, a pack of bacon, 2 oranges, and a newspaper. Then he paused, looked up at Trevor. Trevor had just entered from the hallway, hair wild, half-dressed, like he'd barely slept. Ray stared at him, then held out the newspaper. "Comes with free therapy." Trevor smiled, nervous. "Pun deserve worse. Pony do." They stood there, not quite eye to eye, but not clashing anymore. Ray pulled out a frying pan and cracked eggs like nothing happened. Jackson watched in silence, eyes bouncing between them. "You know," Ray said over the sizzle of bacon, "and you always talk too much." Trevor leaned against the counter. "So I've heard, but last night." He flipped a strip of bacon. Let it crackle. "You did something. Good. Twisted, stupid, risky, but good." Trevor looked up. Ray added, "I thought you just wanted me out of the house." "Sended. They did," Trevor said. "Until I didn't." They locked eyes for the first time that morning. No performance, no roles, just 2 men too old to keep pretending. "I figured if we were ever gonna reset," Trevor said, "it'd have to be big. Bigger than a fishing trip or a handshake over turkey." "Oh, well," Ray muttered. "Oh, you nailed that part." Karen finally smiled. 15 minutes later, they sat down to eggs, toast, bacon, and silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was full of what had been said and what didn't need saying. "Don't ever do that again," Karen said quietly, pointing her fork at Trevor. "And no promises," Trevor said, grinning. Jackson broke in. "But Grandpa's not going to jail, right?" Ray snorted. "Not unless I punch one of your teachers." Karen gave him a look. Ray added, "Again." Everyone laughed. Even Jackson, even Trevor. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years. But it felt like something had reset, like the gears finally aligned. That night, before heading to bed, Jackson opened his journal. He stared at the blank page for a long time before writing, "On yesterday I thought my father framed my grandfather. Today, I know he just needed to find a way back. And maybe that's what family is. A bunch of broken people trying weird ways to tell each other, 'I still see you.'" He closed the notebook, turned off the light, and let silence be enough. The porch was Ray's domain again. He sat in his old rocker, a blanket across his knees, coffee in one hand, and a wrinkled book resting open on his lap, though he hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. The sun was low, bleeding orange into the treetops. A few birds chirped. Wind moved through the pine like it was trying not to wake anyone. The screen door creaked. Jackson stepped outside and sat down on the steps, legs stretched out, his phone glowing dim in one hand. They didn't speak right away. The quiet between them was easy. Ray finally said, "Oh, you talked to your dad?" Yeah, he's good." He was watching old home movies on the couch. Ray smirked. "What, the one where he falls into the pond at age 12? Swears it was the shallow end." Ray let out a gravelly chuckle. The rocking chair creaked with his breath. You know, Ray said. "Son wasn't always a good dad." Jackson turned. "Ain't told me that. Ain't told me like to bet be did. No, I mean. He said he used to hate how you disciplined him. Said he couldn't breathe around you." Ray nodded slowly. "That sounds about right. But he also said you made him tough, that he'd probably be lost without that." Ray didn't answer. Instead, he sipped his coffee. Jackson looked down at the yard, where the birthday banner had hung 2 days ago. Nothing left now but 2 wooden stakes in the dirt. "Can I ask you something?" Jackson said. "Shoot. And you thought he betrayed you. Did you hate him?" Ray stared forward for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "And just stopped recognizing him." And Jackson frowned. Ray added, "Sometimes love's the quietest thing in the room. You forget what it looks like when you're used to noise." Jackson nodded. That made more sense than he expected. And what about forgiveness? He asked. Ray looked over at him now, really looked. Forgiveness, he said, isn't weakness. It's memory management. You decide what to carry forward, and what's too damn heavy to keep dragging. Jackson smiled. That sound like a quote? Ray shrugged, probably stole it from a fortune cookie. They sat like that for a long time. The sun dipped lower. The birds quieted. Ray finally reached over, placed his heavy hand on Jackson's shoulder, not for balance, not for comfort, just presence. I'm glad you saw the worst in me, he said softly. Because now you'll know what to do with the best. Jackson didn't answer. He didn't need to. The chair creaked again.